publish some things, and that has to fit the criteria that I need for tenure or just keeping my job or defending research time or whatever. And that's really institution specific. So I think what Sarah said is the exact point. You have to think about it in your context. If your job depends on what your direct colleagues feel about your research, and they don't think that practice theory is a legitimate way of doing research, you're probably in danger. You know what I mean? But if that's not the case, if they're like, well, we'll be supportive no matter what you want to do, we just want you to do it well, then I don't think practice theory would hurt you at all, because there is a ton of publishing opportunities in this space. I mean, all the special issues that we get accepted, you see editors really liking what we're trying to do. So there's, I think, quite a legitimate movement going on. And that just means there's a lot of publishing opportunities. So you kind of have to weigh things against each other. And, you know, I've had conversations straight to my face with colleagues in North America that say that I'm not a real researcher, you know, what I'm doing has no value. And you're like, wow, that was really rude. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. I mean, I have a job. I do research I think is interesting. So you can't take everybody's opinion as like shaping you all the time. I think you got to have a little bit more drive and what you feel like is a good research outlet. But that's not always easy to navigate. So I will give you that. It's a process, definitely, and a challenge sometimes.
Two things that strike me on that. One is, if you're based in the US, so, you know, the American-based entrepreneurship journals are obviously important. And one of the things that we've been doing as a community over the last, since EAP really, since the first conference, but was to build up a relationship with editors and to inform editors about the EAP community and invite them to our events and try and make entrepreneurship as practice, put it on their radar. So we've struck up relationships and had editors from all the entrepreneurship journals over the years. And this year, we're delighted we're going to have Friederike, who is very open to entrepreneurship as practice, but Friederike Welter is coming, representing ETP. And who else, Thomas, do we have tomorrow?
It's on Wednesday. So
on Wednesday, sorry, yeah, Wednesday.
It will be Renate Meyer, also from Organization Studies. I think she's still the editor-in-chief, or one of the co-editors-in-chief. So that's very interesting, because it will be organization point of view, and organization studies has been open to practice studies a lot. I mean, if you look at where most of you have published, I mean, org studies is one of the major outlets. And then we will also have Henrik Berglund, who is a professor at Chalmers University here in Sweden, and he has just founded a new journal, which is called Journal of Business Venturing Design. So it's a sister journal to JBV. And so his approach comes from a slightly different perspective, which is the design science point of view on entrepreneurship. At the same time, there is also a lot of room and space where these two things overlap. So having a practice-based view to study how entrepreneurs behave as designers, I think that's a good marriage. I see a good astrological sign there going for both of them, you know, a match. So that's why I think it's good to have these on board. And as you say, I mean, it's not like I also see this other question in the chat. Can you talk about the conversations you've had with non-practice theorists? I completely agree with Neil that sometimes you face people where you completely see that your worldviews and their worldviews when it comes to research are entirely different, and you will not find a common ground. I find it most difficult to talk to people who are monists in their worldviews, so who think that the world is either completely rational and can be explained and put into different parts, and then you have the other extremists who think that no, nothing can be ever true, or we cannot find the truth out there. And I myself, for instance, I think of being a more or less, it depends on the question I ask, right? Sometimes I might like to look at the world as being explained in patterns because there's use to it in some situations. But in some other situations, I have to embrace the complexity and the chaos. And that's also useful to think about. So I believe if it's always good, if you want to have conversation with as many as people as possible, it's good to understand where the other people come from, which also means that don't be ignorant to other theories. I mean, read other stuff. Just because there's like, it's a quantitative studies and it has like a causal model, doesn't mean it's bad, right? It's just different. And perhaps by reading that stuff, you might also add a different perspective, add something new, and so forth.
Yeah, sorry, I just had a second point as well. And Thomas, you've been great throughout saying you're a pragmatist and all the rest. Another great pragmatist in the field is Dean Shepherd. And Dean's advice in all of this is, what do they look for? So if they're looking for you to fit a certain thing, and the name of your game is that you have to get tenure, then he says just play the rules, get your tenure, and then you can be as creative as you want with your research. So I guess it's about finding an institute, understanding how open your institute is to alternative perspectives. And if you're if where you want to work and if you're on the jobs market and the kind of institutes that you're applying for aren't open to your research, then it's either about trying to find the institutes who are, and yes, you'll find a lot more flexibility or a lot more openness to this perhaps in European universities, although Niels already explained that some colleagues just won't buy it either. So you're going to have those issues here as well. But if you do want to get tenure and that's what the message is from where you're applying, then perhaps it's a case of bumping up your non-practice research to get those publications. And then once you get tenure, you can experiment a bit further. But that's a long-term gain. Do you know, it's a long time to keep progressing at something. If practice is your interest and what you are passionate about, and you want to explore those theories more in your work, having to put it off on a long term or put it on a long finger would be a bit frustrating. So I guess do a little bit more research and understand kind of what institutes are looking for as well. Some other questions there as well. So somebody, Romain, you were speaking about being co-funded by the SME in France. That's really interesting. Do they require your research to feed back into their practices? Are they looking for practical implications of practice research?
Hello, everybody. Do you hear me?
Yes, yep. Clearly, thank you.
Okay. Well, in fact, I'm very free to do my research. I have 100% of my time to do my research, so it's fantastical. But they are just interested. In fact, they're interested in my research because it will give them some kind of legitimacy. Because it's they want to promote the practice. To promote the practices of territory entrepreneurship, which is some kind of how an enterprise can be at the service of the local development, and they want to be more known in their practices and their view of doing business of entrepreneurship, and that's all what they want, in fact. And they know that if we talk about their practices, because it's not only one enterprise, it's a federation. They will be more considered by founders, by the state, and so on. So it's just like a win-win game, and yeah, and so
great. It's interesting to hear different models.
Yes.
Yeah. So it is possible.
Yeah, it's possible. I don't know how is it in other countries, but in France, a lot of the PhD are funded like this. So a PhD applicant is hired by a company, and so he's in the company basically, and half of his or her salary is funded by the state. It's a way of funding, the research and to incentivize businesses to hire researchers and PhD. So
very good.
I think it's interesting.
Yeah, good initiative. Yeah. Just in response to Alana's question there about the non-practice researchers as well. I find, Alana, some of the biggest complexities I've had or challenges I've had in speaking about my research is actually with the pure practice people in my school, and that I found their reading groups one of the most hostile experiences. You know, so I find there's sometimes a snobby element or an elitist element to this research, and unless you know all of the scholars and all the writers inside out, that sometimes people create these kind of barriers to entry almost to it. And as I was explaining before, I've come at this kind of from an empirical side of it, and I'm trying to understand more the theories and that side. So I'm certainly no expert on the theoretical side, but I found the practice people in my school more challenging than the non-practice people. So I guess it kind of depends. So one thing I was thinking we might talk about is both along the lines of the recruitment process and then the terms of our tenure when we got our jobs as well, because I remember being a PhD and just wondering, well, what is that recruitment process like? And it tends to differ a little bit, maybe, again, it might be a regional difference, but how do people get the jobs they get? And then what do they have to do when they actually get the jobs? So
Orla, I think somebody had their hand up.
Oh, excuse me. Sorry, I didn't see that.
Oh, sorry, Orla. It's me, Sasha.
Hi, Sasha. Yeah.
No. I didn't have a chance also to present me earlier. I'm based in Mexico right now, so there's quite a huge time difference similar to Heiko. And I'm German. I did my PhD studies in Finland. And basically there I was very much involved into process theories. And actually right now I'm discovering entrepreneurship as practice. And also here, similar like Romain, in Mexico, we are quite free to choose, you know, what we research. But what I have seen, and it's also interesting because I'm very much involved into executive education, teaching MBA students. And I think that's also because it's a very practical approach. So I think also, you know, when you research entrepreneurship from a practice perspective, you also gain a lot of useful practical information that you can pass on to your, to executive education. And I'm also very much linked to the Entrepreneurship Center. So I think it's quite, people really appreciate it. You know, what you research and how you can pass this on and put it into basically practice. So
yeah, it's a great exposure to the practices of entrepreneurs, isn't it? To the reality that then Thomas was making that point earlier as well, that you can bring that back into the classroom. It certainly informs your teaching far more than, well, any surveys I've been involved in having given me the same kind of insight that I can bring into the classroom as being there firsthand with people as they're setting up and organizing, growing businesses.
right.
Yeah.
Can I say something real quick, Orla?
Please do, yeah.
So just for everybody's reckoning, in the program, we discussed as organizers to have a practitioner panel during this day. And we couldn't put it together in time because we weren't sure how it would work. So we ended up not doing it. But I think a practitioner panel in the future could be really nice. We'd have to think carefully about how to bring in practitioners to the discussion so it's interactive and interesting. But I think entrepreneurship as practice can do a lot more for making those connections with practice, personally. That's my observation.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea.
But it is appreciated that people that we're trying. that's for sure.
Yeah. So yeah, should we chat about the conditions of tenure? Is that kind of thing of use to the group, or what do you think?
I think it feeds into many of the questions that concern contextuality, right? Because we've already seen there is a couple in our group who have sort of semi-tenured positions without having the need to go through the entire tenure process. Then there is the more stereotypical, one could say, North American career where you have to transgress from one university where you did your PhD to another where you do your tenure, and then you have like a 5, sometimes 7, I think, year process where you have time to publish as many papers as possible to get tenure. So I think there is different contexts, and all of them have their pros and cons. And it's also, I mean, if you're willing to move around the world, you can find your place.
And what was the story in Jönköping then, Thomas? So you did your PhD there, and they were...
Actually, it goes further back.
Oh,
I did my master's here.
Oh.
So, I mean, that's the point. If you look at my CV, it's like, what has he done? Is he, is he always like, no, but I
this
think
man loves Jönköping.
Yeah, well, no, and that's because it's not such an exciting place, to be honest. I mean, the city is tiny, right? It's in the middle of Sweden. It's nothing like, but to be honest, I found my place, so to speak, at least for the time being. And I was lucky in a sense that my university didn't have those criteria, and I must leave. And I mean, of course, my publication output at the moment isn't the biggest. But I think when I applied for the position as assistant professor, it also went through an external evaluation. So it's not like the university just gave it to me based on the merits that I have internally, which is, I think, even a fair reason enough, right? They saw in me more than the list of publication as an employee, and I think that's fair. But I think we also had one of the points, like how important is it, for instance, to have papers under review? And I think that was very important for me, because I had and I still have to some extent, a couple, like 3 high-risk publications under review, but they are in top journals. So in a sense, that's also a signal that you can send to your committee. And I think that in my case, at least, the decision that was made, okay, that I deserve the assistant professorship was made basically on my potential as a researcher as well. That they could see that I take it seriously, and that I do it at my own pace, right? So even now as an assistant, we don't have a formal tenure track. I have unlimited employment. But nevertheless, I mean, I take it seriously. I do want to publish. It's not that. And if you can signal that in some way or another, I think that's beneficial even in schools where you might not need a tenure track and where you might stay long, but try to show them that you're serious about staying in academia, so to speak.
And what about Sarah? Is UVic, is it a traditional tenure track you're talking about then?
Yes. So yeah, so when I came here about 6 years ago, so it's a tenure track. So when you first come in, you come in for 3 years. So it's basically a contract for 3 years. So you get reappointed after 3 years. So the year before 3 years, so at the end of 2 years, you apply for reappointment. And at the time I was like, why am I putting all of these materials together? Research statement, teaching statement, all of this stuff. And making sense. So you have to write. So for your research statement, you have your research identity, you put it in a nice picture. For me, it's a Venn diagram. And basically you're telling the story of your research identity, because a lot of your colleagues might not know what practice theories are, or this or that, right? Because it could be random people from your colleagues that are going to analyze it. So you put that together. And then later on, when you apply for tenure, 3 years or 2 years later, so at the end of your 5th year, you apply for tenure. Then you already have those materials to build in. So you just have to update them. So it was actually quite helpful to have the process of reappointment. And I think that's probably why they do it as well, to give you feedback, because then you meet with your dean. So here we don't have departments, so it's not siloed. Everyone reports directly to the dean. And so then you meet with your dean and he gives you feedback on, how you're doing, what should you be doing more of or less of. And the requirements, I think, are pretty traditional for North American schools. So as far as research, you need to have 5 publications. 2 of those need to be in a top tier, so an A level journal. Some schools do 3, this one does 2, but we also have because again, we don't have departments, we have finance people, we have accounting people. So we have a pretty broad journal list. The one that we follow is the AJG or ABS list. And so we follow that, and anything that is an FT50 journal is also an A for us. So So, and again, there's no restrictions, and this is something I really appreciated because we're not siloed. I could be publishing in accounting and that still counts, right? The other schools, when I was on the job market, they really just wanted me to publish in entrepreneurship journals. And to me, that was a bit concerning because I was doing interdisciplinary work. A lot of my co-authors are either from human resources management or OB, or, you know, so, and I see benefits in doing that type of work, and that's what I wanted to continue doing. So to me, coming here, which was actually moving to a different country, I had never been to Canada even. But I really, just like Thomas was saying, he found his place, and I really did find my place here as well, because again, there's that openness for the type of work that I do. I have a little bit of more freedom to do creative work, and that's okay, you know, as long as I'm publishing, right? Of course. So yeah, so I think it's just the regular tenure track. So reappointment and then tenure, and that's it. Yeah.
Yeah. And Neil, you're the same as a traditional tenure track in VU?
Yeah. So how I got into the tenure track is kind of a funny story. I told you the kind of PC version, but the non-PC version is I applied to a position that was a full professor for my tenure track. And I just wrote in the letter, I know I'm not going to be a full professor. I've just finished my PhD, but your topic is really close to what I did my PhD on. Would you, maybe have a look? And so they invited me in to just learn more about my research and things. And they ended up offering me an assistant professor job. So I feel very grateful that that worked out, because I was super lucky. And then the tenure track, they'd go by points, and I had the exact amount of points I needed for tenure. Like, you can't go any less, So I was you get a certain amount of points for publications, but the problem is that the point system kind of fluctuates over time. So it's really hard if you publish early to make sure that you have enough points if that journal drops in the rankings or something by the time you come up for tenure. And that happened to me, and I just barely made it. So it's just like, I need 185 points. Not that that means anything for you guys, but I got exactly 185 points. So it was like down to the wire. But I made it, so I feel very grateful for that.
Thank you. Well, there's a question here about internships, and then Edwin, I see your hand is raised as well. So did anyone do internships or visit visit or internships for your PhDs?
I did a visit abroad. Yeah.
I didn't. It wasn't a requirement, but I know some programs do. So I have students coming to study with me from Brazil, and for them, they call it a sandwich period. And so they have to actually go to a different country and study. So I think some countries, going back to geography, are a bit more in that requirement than others.
I actually went to Jönköping. I went to Jönköping and
Linköping. It's a many shipping.
Many shoppings. Yeah. So, but I'm curious, it's a great question about it though, because from my experience, one of the challenges I faced was integrating that back into my thesis then. Actually, it was for a research master's I did. I was just trying to remember there. Yeah, it was actually for my research master's, and it was problematic trying to incorporate that international study into my overall thesis for my master's as well. And my friends, so I did my PhD at Hunter Centre for Entrepreneurship in Strathclyde. And any of my friends who did internships or visits as part of their PhDs, they had a great experience and was fabulous for networking. But in terms of the write-up, it was quite challenging. So I'm wondering, Thomas, for your study abroad part, how did you incorporate, was there any problem incorporating that back into your overall write-up, or did you have it as a separate paper, or how did you manage it?
I didn't. I mean, for me, the main thing in my program was that they wanted us to spend time abroad. But that doesn't mean that I have to conduct research abroad. Of course, that's ideal. But the main idea is that you are going to another university where you visit your third supervisor for the thesis. So we usually add a third international supervisor to the thesis team. And you're going to visit that person at the university. And the main point is to learn how does it look like at another university. And I think that's very valuable. And that's also one of the main reasons why most of the universities push people to go to another university after their PhDs, right? So that you are in a different context, that you're not only sort of experiencing what you're used to during the PhD. And I've used that time not in order to cooperate with another person, but to write up one of the chapters in my dissertation and to work on 2 papers. So I really had like, you're being taken out of your context. I went to Australia, so I had a great time zone difference as well. So while I was up, everybody else was asleep. So I had nobody to disturb me with all the rest that comes with the university life, you know. So I enjoyed it very much, and you learn another context. So I think whenever you have the possibility to do it, it's great. And at least in Sweden, I know that we also have you can apply for funds to do that. So there is like a couple national government funds or private funds that fund these visits of PhD students and postdocs to other research institutes. And I think there's probably similar things all around the world, and each country has their own, but yeah, that's how I would go about it. But you have to get the okay from your institution and from your supervising team, of course.
I think that's a really good way to use the time abroad then, where you're focusing on your papers, etc. So yeah, I think having a clear purpose to what the time abroad is for, is it for collaboration purposes, mostly for networking and that, or is it for a separate study that you're trying to conduct over there as well, to make the time as useful and beneficial as possible. There was a question from, I think it was Enrico, but have we lost him? I don't see him online now.
I think we lost him.
We lost him. Okay. Yeah. Okay, so he's gone. Okay. Does anybody else have anything else? Any other questions? Was there anything I missed in the chat?
I can say something too.
Please. Yes, please.
I just recently, for the first time, went through the hiring process, but on the other side, which was really interesting to see like how we went about hiring a new assistant professor on their tenure track, what we were doing, trying to assess PhDs, etc. And I think that might be kind of nice for people to hear. So we had one position that we advertised publicly, and I think we got 400 applicants. So first off, it's like, well, you know, like, how do you even, you can't, that's ridiculous, you know, like, so what do we do? Basically, we have like this online system, and we go through just simply flagging people that are remotely in the ballpark. Like, there's so many people that applied from all over the world, nothing to do with entrepreneurship, nothing to do with the call of the kind of professor we were looking for. Some didn't have PhDs. We were like, what? So we just got all these like random people applying. So it was like a lot of spam almost. So we had to filter out all the spam applicants, which is a weird thing to say, right? Because some of these people are probably legitimately good people and wanted good jobs, but it's like not even remotely close to the call. So still feels a bit weird. We got down to 30 eventually, after we went through this a couple times, 30 that we had actually read their CVs and look what they're doing. And I'd say the first thing we looked for in the CV was their research experience. Like, did they actually have experience doing research and not that it had to be published, although that was something we were looking for, if they had any publications, but did it look like they are like skilled researchers? And how you can communicate that in a CV is, I think, challenging. It comes a lot through your research papers, but it's also about like how much research training you have. So really talk about how much training you have as a researcher, how much time you spent in the field, how many winter workshops, summer workshops, conferences, coursework, anything that kind of communicates that you've like been taught and have had a lot of experience on doing research. Conversations with guests or top scholars or somebody that the people would know, even if it's not like published, of course. It's just communicating that you're you're in this community and you're young. We know that we're hiring somebody that's, you know, a new assistant professor. So of course we can't assess them on research backgrounds only, although some job applicants have like ETP publications or JBV publication, which I was really surprised about. I didn't have one of those when I was a PhD student, but quite a few people do. Not that they published it first author, granted, you know, they're on a research team or something. North Americans are really strategic about this, so they'll like get a top publication in their PhD with a group of other really good scholars, because that's a big signal for them to get a job. But you see that in other places as well. So we were looking for these people that had a good top publication, but I think we also looked at more than that. You know, we also interviewed and were interested in people that didn't have top publications. But just showing evidence that you are like a researcher that's really a part of a research community, that you've taken a lot of interest and time and focused. The next one was your research papers. Like, actually, what are you researching? Are they, you know, up to a scholarly standard? Do they have promise? Do you as a candidate have promise to publish during your tenure track? Because we want people to be successful in their tenure track. We want them to finish the process. So we were looking for people that wouldn't drop out, but would also, you know, be successful. So when we did interview, I think we did 5 fly-in interviews to talk to the people. And that the fly-in interview part, the actual face-to-face, what was important there was less the research, because we already had selected on research. It was more like, are they people that we have to work really closely with these people, like teaching, coordination, solving problems with students, etc. So we need to be able to like really get along, and you have a good connection with this person. Like, just because they're a good researcher could mean, and I think it's likely, they have somewhat of a big ego. Like if you have a JBV publication in your PhD, you kind of feel like, you know, you're the best researcher ever. This thing is easy, and you're not very collegial. So I think what I would recommend first, so after communicating your research possibilities, is also, if you get that opportunity to be interviewed, that you really ask questions about where you're going, you know, about the team you're going to be joining. How do they work? What kind of expectations do they have? Where are they from? Get to know them as people, because that's ultimately what was really important for us, is like, can we actually work with this person? So yeah, we asked the candidates in the interview to actually do a research presentation, but we already knew they had a good research profile. We wouldn't have invited them. We already thought that they would be successful researchers. It was more, we were evaluating them on other criteria at that point. So I hope that's kind of, again, it was quite, since from a practice theory perspective, there was a lot of like unplanned improvisation by the hiring team too. We didn't have a like standard processes, you know, we didn't have a lot of explicit rules. It was more, how did you feel? How did you feel? You know, and we would talk about it for a while. So it's quite tacit in some respects on these evaluations. So I think if you don't get hired at a job, then especially if you're in one of the people that are invited out, I don't necessarily think that that's reflecting that you aren't going to be successful somewhere else. It's just more about the match and what happened with the people that are evaluating you. Just like, I guess, like an entrepreneur, you know, I mean, they can have a pitch and it can go poorly, but that doesn't necessarily mean the venture is crap and they should give up. They can do it again with some other team and have a totally different response. So yeah, I think it takes a little bit of courage as well to kind of get out there. I definitely saw it from the people that were applying with us, that it's not easy to be on this job market. I would say it's probably a terrible experience to be on this job market, to be putting yourself out there and stuff. But at least you have maybe some idea about what the other people are doing at the value.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful to know kind of what goes on behind the scenes as well. And, you know, when you hear those figures, like 400 applying for something, you're like, oh my God, so many people on the jobs market. But like you're saying, then it's
So
10% of that is what you're actually looking at. And that, sorry, I was just going to say that kind of relates as well to when you hear about journal submissions. You know, you hear the failure rate of submissions to journals, and it's very daunting and everything. But then, you know, they're probably seeing the same experience in submissions, you know, that a large percentage of what they get just isn't going to be a good fit with the journal in the first place. So you're condensing down all the time as well. So it shouldn't be put off, obviously, because we hear those figures. But it's interesting, Neil, I was just curious, when you had say you flew in those 5 to 6 people, were they treated separately and each given a separate time to come for their interview, or was there an occasion where each of the candidates had to meet each other or mingle or meet over lunch?
5 different flyouts, different weeks.
Okay.
Separated, which was nice because you really focus on them. And as a department, as a section of the entrepreneurship people, we all took a little part. So somebody would go out to dinner with them, and somebody else would go to lunch, and then they would have a presentation and have a meeting. So it was kind of like a full day or maybe a day and a half with each person. So it's time consuming. But when you share it across the section, it's not so bad.
And I think that's a nice way to do it. Actually, I've been twice I've been a candidate twice where the emphasis was on all the candidates meeting together. Yes, it's really weird. So it's worthwhile, again, if you're applying, to just understand what you're going into. So yeah, they thought it'd be really nice to get all the candidates together, have a lunch together. And it felt a little bit like lamb to the slaughter. It was such a strange dynamic because everybody there wants a job, obviously, and you're trying to be nice and you're trying to kind of differentiate yourself but not be weird and strange at the same time and all the rest. So that
sounds awful.
It was so awkward.
I mean, I did one interview in Belgium. I won't say the university, but that was a disaster when I was trying to get an assistant professor job. They were like 2 hours late. So I just went to the university, to the location, and nobody was there. And so I just waited forever. And eventually one of them came, was like, oh yeah, this is today. Okay, cool. And then showed me to a room where they left me again for a couple more hours. And then I went and I was supposed to have this whole day with them. It ended up being they could have cared less that I was there. And that was really weird to me because they were paying for everything. I was like, why did you do this whole thing? And they were just, they were just totally dysfunctional, that they didn't as colleagues, they didn't like each other. And so they were angry that they had to do this, and somebody didn't turn up and do the interview with me. So they had to find somebody else. And I was like, as a candidate, I would have said no if they offered me a job there, because I mean, if they can't even organize an interview, I mean, what is it going to be like organized teaching? It's going to be a disaster. So you have to kind of be mindful about that stuff too. There's a lot of disorganization out there to be careful. Your life could be pretty miserable. Hard to see from the outside, but
yeah, and you have to take these as signals, don't you? I mean, we don't have concrete information on any of these things when we're applying and trying to understand what the culture of an organization is like, but all these things are signals as well.
And it's actually, I had experiences where I was interviewing at the academy, and a school, I'm not going to say the name of the school, the dean was interviewing me, and they were actually quite mean to me because I did qualitative research. And they said, well, we need 1 AMJ a year. There's no way you're ever going to do this. Anyway, it was a weird 5 minutes into the interview, and I think we hated each other. And, later on, making sense of this, I'm actually glad it happened then at the interview stage, not even job talk stage, because if you actually move to a place and then, this person's going to be your dean. And so it's good that these signals actually come across so early on, because then you move on, right? Because it signals it could be a dysfunctional organization, so it's you also interviewing them a little bit. And then the other piece I just wanted to add, so I was on the market in 2015 to then start in 2016. So that's another piece. I think it's possibly different. Maybe it's changing now with everything being online, but back then in North America, at least, you applied a year before, you moved to a place. So it's even before you defend your dissertation, so you have to have a pretty good sense of things. One thing that I noticed at the time was that, so I interviewed with several schools, got several job talks, and the research schools, the full research schools where I did a job talk were the only ones that asked me to also do a teaching talk, which was kind of interesting. So the teaching schools that I applied to didn't ask me to do a teaching talk, just to show that I can teach. So I thought that was interesting. So I think those research schools were actually looking for someone who can also teach, which is good, and also signaled something about the school, which I appreciated, right? So, because both things are important. And here, they actually fly you in for 2 full days, right? Because you have to have a research talk in one day, a teaching talk in another day, actually interact with students, which to me was good because I got a sense of the MBA students they had and what types of questions they asked as well. It's brutal, 2 days of like the whole day just interviewing with people, and then you just feel like you're saying the same thing over and over again. You can't remember if you already said it or not. But some places do fly you out for, you come in the day before, and then you stay 2 days and then fly out. So it's really a 4-day commitment almost.
Yeah. I see a comment there from Mariska about a research program. Do you want to explain what you mean by a research program? Is this a plan for?
I just have vague knowledge about it, but it's a term that I hear often, especially during the interview process. And what's your research program? I understand is a typical question.
Yeah. I think, well, I'm not sure if I called it a research program, but it was a plan for future research and that side of things. Yeah. I really enjoyed that. I thought that was one of the funnest parts of the whole process, because it's where you think, gosh, I'm at the start. Well, you work so hard and you're blooming PhD, and then you're like, oh no, I've done all this and I'm going to end up, I climbed up these mountains and I'm going to be bottom of the pile when I start off into the sector again. But this was an opportunity to dream, I guess, where you can really think, well, if the world was my oyster and I could do whatever I want, and why can't you? These are the avenues I'd love to go down with my research. And I think if you can be excited by what you're doing in the future, I think that's contagious, and the panel will see that as well. So I loved that part of it. And some of the paths that I followed have materialized, and others haven't so far yet. Other parts have been completely serendipitous, but it's a really nice thing. So if you can just think about the people that you'd like to collaborate with in the future, and I think during your PhD, it's a really good time to think about what that research program could be, because during your PhD, that's the opportunity that you have to try to make those contacts. So I remember thinking I'd really like to do stuff in identity work and, around passion and these kinds of things. And I'd met Melissa Carden during when the Babson PhD Consortium, and there was kind of a contact there, and I was kind of able to follow up afterwards about that and have some kind of connection. And then, so you're kind of able to build in future research streams if you think about it and are strategic then during your conference attendance as well, that you can, and back to the whole thing of traveling abroad and working with spending time with as a visiting scholar, that kind of thing. If you can incorporate any of that into your PhD, then that just really opens up those avenues for future research as well, really nicely. So I'd say have fun. Yeah, have fun and enjoy it, and just think what avenues you can go down and who could you potentially work with.
I think it kind of links up to what I was saying is, as an evaluator, if somebody wants to hire a new assistant professor, like getting the PhD is, to put it in a maybe too trivial way, is like getting your driver's license. After your PhD is when you get to drive the car, and people, I think as assessors know that PhD is a challenging experience, but we don't expect you to be the next Darwin in your PhD. But we do expect to have really cool research ideas for a pipeline in the future, because all of us have a research pipeline. And you need to have like a pipeline going forward of what you think your next projects will be in the next few years to map out how this would work for you in the next few years. And like to be very convincing on that, I think is extremely important. So it's, yeah, when I say you're being evaluated on whether or not you could have be successful research career, it's based on this like almost pitching a research program or pipeline that is in development, but you don't really have any results yet. We're kind of buying into the possibility of you delivering on your on your pipeline. So it's not so much past evaluation on the past, it's more still looking into the future, what we think that your possibilities would be here in the future in terms of research. Obviously, teaching is important as well. But.
And just to add to that, Neil, so just thinking from an evaluator standpoint as well, things that have stand out to me sitting in committees, looking at applications too. If you can, even if you're showing or talking or writing about your research program, if you can make connections, if you really care about a school, make connections with faculty in that school, like, oh, my research pipeline aligns with the work of whatever, or bring it up in an interview, because to me that shows that you took the time to actually learn and think about fit. Because fit's important, right? So, you know, how does your research, you know, advance the school, or, you know, and vice versa, right? Because it's going to be a synergistic type of relationship. So things like that. And then on the other side of the coin, make sure that you write the right university name. So don't say like you're applying to the University of Victoria and you say like, oh, I'd love to get a job at University of British Columbia, which is a completely different university, right? So make sure you, you know, triple check everything, because I see it every time we have a job opening. I always see something like that. It happens. It's fine.
But these are the ones I think that you would auto sort out, right? I mean,
Yeah.
even just if I'm in a committee for hiring PhD students, and it's the exact same thing, and it's like an auto reject. I think that's like where also the 400 of Neil's list have trickled down to a couple hundred after just filtering out the ones who had the wrong university, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. We've mentioned teaching. Sorry, Neil, were you going to say something else?
Oh, go ahead.
Are you sure? I was just going to say, we've mentioned teaching a few times, and it's a very big part of our jobs, let's face it. I think it might be worthwhile if we just shared the realities of teaching and how teaching is organized in our institutes, because I think it's different models across our different institutes. So I say this to everybody, Heike and Sasha, I know you're probably involved in this in teaching as well, or anyone who is in this boat, but it might be worthwhile, sharing what the teaching load requirement is and how it changes and how your institute views teaching, if it's equal to research or the priority or the emphasis. So let me see, Thomas, go ahead. Somebody spoke there.
Me now? What? Yeah.
Yeah, okay, Thomas, we start with you then. What's it like in Jönköping? What's the teaching requirement? What's the teaching load?
So as a PhD student, so first of all, the basic PhD studies in Sweden is 4 full years. And in my institute, it also includes 20% of teaching. So you get in total 5 years for your PhD. That's good because at the end of your PhD, you have 1 full year of teaching experience, which you, for instance, require to be eligible for an assistant professorship in Sweden. So in a sense, teaching can also be a restriction in some settings. If you have not enough teaching, so to speak, you might not be eligible for a particular position that requires a lot of teaching. Now, as an assistant professor, it really depends a bit also on how much external research money you can get in. But the basic share for teaching for us is very high. So we have about 80% of teaching, given that you have no external research funds, and 20% of research only. So it's also quite risky if you don't have a pipeline of research and you go into a teaching intensive position. you might struggle to get your research out. So that's also something to consider. If you want to be a good researcher, and if you want to continue having a research in career in research, perhaps you shouldn't go into a teaching heavy university if you don't have a very good pipeline already, or if you haven't published already. But you can bump it up, of course, with external research funds. So if you manage to get funds, then you lower your teaching load effectively. That's how most people do it in our institute. Yeah.
Great. Okay. What's it like in UVic, not British Columbia?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So here, so the load is 40-40-20 for research, teaching, service. But the first years, they protect you. Actually, administration tries to protect you as much as possible from service. You just do minimal service. Then once you get tenure, you're, the 20% is a real 20%. For teaching, the 40% means a 2-2 load. So a total of 4 classes in an entire year. So 2 per semester, but sometimes my first 2, my second and third year, I was able to teach everything in 1 semester. So summer semester, I was teaching 4 sections, 2 different courses, and that was part of the contract as well. Is it was only 2 preps, so 2 different courses and then 2 sections, and that made it the 4 sections total that I needed, and it continues like this, now. When I become associate. So that's pretty nice. And that's what I was looking for. That was important for me, so I could continue doing my research. And so that was great. Yeah.
Okay, great. And what about yourself, Neil? What's VU like?
As assistant professor, it's 60% teaching, 40% research. 60-40. No administrative duties as assistant professor. Only when you're associate professor. And then when you become associate professor, you have to defend your research time. So it can fluctuate depending, a maximum 50-50. But you can go down to 10% research time and 90% teaching. But it kind of fluctuates depending on your research performance.
Okay.
And service is included in your teaching time.
Yeah.
That's how they calculate it.
Okay, so everyone's kind of the same. My model is probably closest to Sarah, I guess, that it's the 20% service kicks in then after a few years as well. Our tenure, so I'm although our model kind of similar to Jönköping in that we recruit. Well, the contract I'm on, I was recruited and then got tenure after the first year, and then so it's a permanent, a full-time position rather than going through a traditional tenure track. But yeah, the breakdown will be about 3 to 4 courses per year that you are teaching, and then you can have them semesterized, which has its pros and cons as well. Then when you have a really intensive research or intensive teaching period, without the balance as well. And then Sasha, I'm just curious about you or Heiko as well. Heiko, do you have, is your teaching balance, is this kind of similar to what we were talking about as well, or do you have much research time in your positions?
No, go ahead. Okay. Before I was also at where Heiko is working in Colombia, and a year ago I moved to Mexico, and which was actually quite interesting and attractive for me because I could apply their different tracks. So we have a teaching track or research track. So I applied for the research track, which actually allows me to dedicate half of my time for research. So I'm having like 4 courses per year, and the rest of it's simply for research. And usually I also try to put all my teaching into the September, December period. We have trimesters here. And so basically the rest of the year I have for research, which is quite attractive. But it's this research track thing. And actually I'm here at this university, there's an internal system where you can apply to be classified as an assistant or associate professor or full professor. But here I'm totally out of that. I didn't even apply for that. So I'm just like a research professor. which is
Yeah.
quite good.
There are some universities in the UK who are like that as well and have their different tracks that you can apply for. So that I think all of this is saying that there's different models out there. So everybody should just be aware that the different models exist. It's not just one type of academic job, one type of academic position. And it's about trying to find what suits us and find that fit. And then this question that came up in the chat about your department and how much of an influence that has. So I think, I don't think that it can limit. I think it's more based on your research. And maybe that's where the responsibility has to be with you as well in terms of the conferences that you're attending. So definitely through the department can provide an identity on your CV saying that you know these people, and the people who are in your department then, indirectly become associated with you. And if the people in your department aren't from the same discipline to the people that you're applying for jobs for, you need to make those connections, I would say, through the different conferences and maybe the visiting positions and things like that, to show that you have networks in the space. And again, I thought Neil's point as well about showing your research activity on your CV, if you don't even have the publications, in terms of the types of events that you're attending. So even saying that you're attending entrepreneurship oriented events or EAP type events or the summer schools and the winter schools will show that you're connected into a community and into a network. And that will carry forward as well. Does anybody else want to say something about that before we?
Yeah, I just to add very quickly, I think this is where cover letters are very helpful, because cover letters are kind of like cookie cutter. They all kind of read the same. But if I see someone coming from a different department, that triggers my mind. Oh, why? So I'm going to go to the cover letter and read why. Well, maybe you have a background in entrepreneurship, or you've attended conferences, you have paper presentations, maybe it's your pipeline, right? So then tailoring that cover letter, and maybe you actually make the connection to faculty in the school, like, in entrepreneurship. All of those things added to what Orla was saying would go in the cover letter. You don't want to make it too big either, because again, we might be reading 400 applications. But I think it would be a good place to signal all of that.
And it's about tying that narrative together again, isn't it? That we were talking about before, research narrative. And if your research narrative can provide a cohesive argument, then that's it. It doesn't really matter where your background is from. And I actually had a conversation with somebody recently, and they're publishing in this area, and it's actually in relation to the business failure research, and they're from Ireland. And I was thinking, I've never come across you before, how come our paths haven't met across? And it turns out that their whole PhD was in economics and information technology or something like that in over in the UK. So they have kind of stumbled upon entrepreneurship and are really interested in the area. And it's like, oh, that's brilliant, because they're bringing such a different skill set and background and everything, and journals and publications that I'm not familiar with as well. So there's so many opportunities from it, but it's about kind of creating the narrative that makes it fit as well. So how are we doing? Are there any kind of last questions anybody has about any of this? I think we're kind of coming to the end of the time for this session, although I'm nervous saying this now, considering I got my times wrong before. No.
Yeah, you're right.
I am right. Okay. I think it's really useful to have these conversations, and hopefully you found the Q&A session useful yourselves as well. If anything else crops up, sure, over the next few days, be sure to ask any of us. We'd love to go through them then. Otherwise, over to you, Neil.
Just to wrap up this session, I think that it's a great idea to reach out if you're interested in academic career and practice theories, that you make these connections with all of us here and continue that, because that'll definitely help with, well, reference letters and just showing that you're active in a community. I think that's extremely important. I prepared a few slides to end our session here, just as a quick wrap up. So yes, this morning we discussed some things with Bill about building community and the importance of community for EAP research, a bit about practice theories and what kind of gaps it's filling in the academic landscape. This is kind of a last moment to kind of ask any questions that you want to about this topic discussed at all today. You know, we also discussed a lot of things about what are practice theories. There's so many questions out there that you guys asked that we could discuss in further detail, that we can continue to do so in person, of course. So what I'm thinking about doing is we have this really nice list of questions that come up all the time, of maybe making like a FAQ page of the website or something would be kind of fun to kind of point people in the right directions. So if anybody wants to volunteer to help develop that, that would be cool. Other than the final words, there's just a few announcements for, you know, the next things. If you're interested in taking your practice-based research further, I and a few other people have organized an AOM symposium on, I think it's going to be August 9th, but it doesn't have a date yet. It's just during the conference. It's about practicing strategy and entrepreneurship, two sides of the same coin. It's with the SAP people, and we're going to have a dialogue between, you know, what SAP researchers have done, what EAP researchers have done, what are the combinations, overlaps. You can see strategy and entrepreneurship. You can see entrepreneurship and strategy. We're trying to go a little bit beyond kind of the language game and see what kind of real connections there might be in this type of research. So that'll be really fun at Symposium. We have some really great speakers. Paula Jarzapowski, for example, will be one of those. Then at EAP, we always organize a fall writing retreat. We don't have dates right now, but it'll just be after summer sometime. And the writing retreat's really nice because we just write for 45-minute blocks. We do 3 45-minute blocks, and then we just chat in between. And it kind of gives you this collective moment. It's like listening to the radio or watching TV when you know the whole nation is watching the same show. It gives you like kind of a sense of connection, even though you're still kind of alone. It really works. It's kind of a weird sensation, but you work for 45 minutes, then you have a nice chat with people, and then you work for another 45 minutes. So it's not so much a feedback on your paper, it's more of just writing sessions. And we chat about our writing techniques and writing practices, and that's kind of cool too.
It also helps you to look these 1,000 hours what's
yeah.
about for writing.
For writing, yeah. So you get a lot done in that 45 minutes. Yeah. Nice. So we'll announce when we'll do the writing retreat. We usually do have like 3 sessions or something. And then, yeah, EAP 8 is going to be hosted in Leeds in person. Well, maybe hybrid, hopefully. That'll be again April next year. So for some of you online, I know that you're not participating for the rest of the conference, but it's just something to keep in mind that there's some other connections you can make for EAP research. Check this out quick. Heiko, your question, I guess, was about the AOM symposium, right?
Yeah, it was about AOM, because that sounds very interesting.
Yeah, it's going to be super interesting. I have no idea. It's a hybrid session, so I don't know if they're recording or not. I'm not going to go there personally. I'm being online, so.
Okay, great. I didn't know. I'll try. And also mentioning the hybrid. So just, yeah, I wouldn't have attended the last 2 EAP conferences probably if they weren't hybrid, right? That's just not not in the cards most of the time for my location in Colombia. So anything you do hybrid is very much appreciated, because it just opens up the conference to people who are on much different continents. So,
yeah, I mean, just like I showed in that first slide, this is all the different countries that people were participating from today.
So yeah, it's very much appreciated.
It's possible to imagine something like that happening unless we are on hybrid. So we'll definitely keep doing this, I think. Yeah, and the only other thing I wanted to talk about was the human relations special issue, but I already talked about that. So I think just leave that. Okay, is there any final questions, remarks? Organizers, do you guys want to add anything?
No, just thank you very much. And you know, like, this is your community too. we were involved in organizing it, but it's your community too. And we would love if you wanted to get involved in any way in organizing any events and, you know, keep in touch. It doesn't just have to be an annual thing. And if you've got ideas or things that you'd like to see happening that you think would be cool, be sure to, you know, contact us and support you and help you organize it and everything. But it would be great to get, yeah, it's dependent on you and how much you want to bring it forward as well. So I think Bill's talk, if you could all just kind of take a leaf out of Bill's book and think, how can we give back, or how can we grow and create the community of readers and writers for ourselves as well that we can mix with, then that would be great. So all ideas, suggestions, contributions would be welcomed.
Yeah, and I'd recommend to participate also in SAP, you know, because there's a really nice infrastructure and a lot of people doing really great research there. It's not like something we're doing is somehow contradictory or competitive with SAP. You can be in multiple communities at once. So I would very much recommend that. I think Heiko is a good example of that, of being really active in SAP, but also having an entrepreneurship angle. And I think that's a great overlap. So yeah, I would explore those. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, I just want to share that in my university college, we have an event with the Etienne Wenger trainer, it's called now, on recent development in social learning theory in May. I can share that news for the community.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
And an upcoming special issue in algebra. The title will be Developing the Future Scholarship of Entrepreneurship Education, Exploring Educator Authenticity Through Practice and Identity.
Nice.
And it will be out in a month or so. We're finalizing the last paperwork around that. I'll share that as well.
Yeah, so you guys anybody can send anything to the EAP Gmail. That's me, and I'll post it on the website. So send me any links. I'm very happy to share opportunities across networks and things like that. All right, thank you very much, everybody online. I'm sure Sarah, have get some rest. Made it.
I'm going to sleep now. Yeah.
Good night.
Bye.
Bye.
Hi, everyone.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll save the chat and also send it to everybody today.
Perfect. Okay.
If I can figure out how to do that.
So you guys are gonna go on a boat ride?
Yeah, we're gonna go on a boat ride. We have free drinks and the weather is awful, so it should be interesting. But yeah,
we're gonna have the Zoom on the boat or no?
Yeah, I can add you in a Zoom on the boat. It might not be the best hybrid for you.
All right. Enjoy. Have a good one. Bye bye.
Bye bye. Does anybody know? I thought you could download the chat somehow, but I can't remember.
You click there, and then it shows save chat.
Down here?
Yeah. Just on top, it says save chat.
Oh, I see it now. Yeah. Thanks.
So now you can look.
Just make sure it's okay. All right. So we need to head to the boat thing at 4. So we have like 20 minutes if you guys want to hang out. These guys are master students. They're going to do some practice. Well, I know Hannes maybe, but maybe Tim. Hannes-based or practice-based research for your thesis, maybe similar. Nice. Welcome, guys.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah. Most of the action happened this morning in terms of practice theory stuff. So, did you watch it online or?
I had a course from 9 to 11.
Yeah.
So.
I can send you the link for the recording if you want.
That'd be nice. And what about tomorrow? What's interesting for us?
Tomorrow, here, maybe I'll just pull up the agenda real quick. I think I actually have it right here. Tomorrow's more like speakers and designed to So we have a keynote address, reflections on the impact of social practice theory for scholarly domains. This one is about performativity. Then we launch our EAP handbook in the afternoon. So we'll have some roundtables about, yeah, new theoretical considerations for EAP research. It's I don't know for you guys. I mean, it will be interesting, but it'll probably go over your heads for a lot of it because it's like kind of taking practice theories further, assuming you know already what they are. So today, earlier was a little bit more Q&A about like what is practice theory and what's a practice and that kind of stuff. So you're welcome to join, of course. I don't know how much you will take away from it. Okay. I'll leave it to you, basically. There's some new stuff like the artifacts of entrepreneurial practice. Like that's a new topic that people are writing about, or this author wants to talk about. So it's not like you're going to be able to find the research on that per se out there yet. It's more cutting edge.
I think for us, it's more about getting the inspiration.
Yeah.
And not about taking away too many things.
Yeah. So you're welcome to join whenever you want. I think you have all the links, right? And you're welcome to join in the room as well and listen. It doesn't matter.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much.
So yeah, feel free. And then we'll always like have chats and stuff like that. So if you have questions when we're not in the sessions on breaks, feel free to ask questions.
You have a record about this morning's practice theory. Can you send it to me?
Yes, of course. Actually, I need to stop the recording. So.